The nausea hit her before the alarm did. Mara pressed her palm flat against her stomach and lay still, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above the bed. The room smelled like the lavender candle she'd burned the night before, and for a moment, just a moment, everything felt ordinary. A Tuesday morning. A woman waking up, nothing more. Then she remembered the test on the bathroom counter, and the ordinary dissolved. She'd taken it at 2 in the morning, alone, with the faucet running so the sound of the wrapper wouldn't wake Devon. 2 lines. She'd sat on the cold tile floor for 20 minutes after, back against the cabinet, knees pulled to her chest, just breathing. Now it was 6:45, and Devon was already in the shower, already humming something she didn't recognize, and Mara was still in bed with one hand on her stomach and a secret that changed everything. She was 31 years old. She was 3 weeks from her promotion review at the architecture firm where she'd worked for 6 years. She was in love with a man who had never once mentioned children, without looking slightly to the left, the way he did when he was calculating something. And she was pregnant. She got up before he came out of the bathroom. She washed her face, put on mascara, made coffee she wouldn't drink. When Devon appeared in the kitchen doorway in his gray suit, tie loose around his neck, she smiled at him like everything was fine. Because she hadn't figured out yet how to tell him. Because she needed a little more time to hold it by herself, this thing that was both terrifying, and she was surprised to find quietly, cautiously wonderful. "You okay?" he asked, reaching past her for the coffee pot. "You look pale. Didn't sleep great," she said. He kissed her temple. "Go in late. You worked too hard." He was gone by 7:15. Mara stood at the kitchen window and watched his car back out of the driveway, and she touched her stomach again, barely a touch, just fingertips, and whispered, "Okay, okay." She told herself she'd tell him Friday. That would give her a few days to rehearse, to find the right moment, maybe make his favorite dinner, and set it up so the conversation had somewhere soft to land. She'd spent her whole career thinking 3 steps ahead. She could do this. She could plan this. She didn't make it to Friday. On Wednesday evening, she was leaving the firm's downtown office when her phone buzzed with a message from Devon, running behind. Meeting ran long. "Don't wait up." She almost let it go. She almost went straight home, ordered Thai food, put on something mindless on TV. But she'd been nauseated all afternoon and hadn't eaten since 10 that morning. And the Thai place near his office was the only thing she could think of that didn't make her stomach turn just imagining it. Ginger broth. She needed ginger broth. His office was 12 blocks away. She walked. The evening air had that early October snap to it, cold enough to make her pull her coat tighter, and the city was doing its end-of-day exhale. Taxis, pigeons, people in good shoes moving fast on the sidewalk. Mara moved with them, hands in her pockets, thinking about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of relief after a week of thinking about everything. She was half a block from the restaurant when she saw him. She almost didn't. He was across the street, and the light was that amber gray of early evening, and there were other people, other coats, other lives moving between them. But she knew the way he walked. She'd known it for 4 years. The slight tilt forward, like he was always arriving somewhere slightly ahead of himself. He was with a woman. Mara stopped walking. Someone bumped her shoulder and said something she didn't hear. She was watching Devon hold open the door of a restaurant, not the Thai place, a different one. The Italian place on the corner she'd always said they should try. And she was watching his hand rest on the woman's lower back as she stepped inside, and she was watching the woman turn briefly in the doorway light, profile catching the amber, and the woman was visibly, unmistakably pregnant. The sidewalk felt unsteady. Mara didn't cross the street. She stood where she was, a coat pulled tight, and she watched the door close behind them, and she stayed there long enough for the light to change twice, 3 times. Then she walked back the way she'd come, slowly, and when she found a bench outside a closed flower shop, she sat down on it and put her face in her hands. She didn't cry. That surprised her. She'd always imagined that if something broke her heart, she'd cry immediately, automatically, the way a body responds to pain. But there was nothing like that. There was just a strange airless silence where feeling used to be, and the distant sound of the city, and her own breathing, steady as a tide. She sat there for a long time. When she got home, she didn't confront him. She'd thought about it on the ride back, played out every version of it, every way she could walk through the door and say, "I saw you." But when she actually turned the key and stepped inside and heard him say, "Hey, you eat yet?" From the living room, something in her went very quiet. Strategic. The part of her that had learned, early, that you don't show your cards until you know what you're playing against. "Not yet," she said. "I'll find something." She made toast. She sat at the kitchen island and ate it in the dark and listened to him watching TV in the other room, and she thought, who is she? Not in anger, not yet. Just the plain practical question of it. She didn't sleep. She lay beside him in the dark and ran through possibilities the way she ran through site plans. Methodically, looking for load-bearing structures, looking for what held the whole thing up. 4 years. His late nights, which she'd always accepted without question because she had her own late nights. Because that was what their relationship was built on. Two people who respected each other's ambition. His odd pauses when she talked about the future. The way he'd canceled their July trip to Savannah with an excuse that didn't quite fit together. The woman was pregnant, which meant this had been going on for at least several months, which meant the overlap was, she pressed her eyes shut. The overlap was significant. At 3 in the morning, she got up and went to the bathroom and sat again on the tile floor, back against the cabinet, same position as 2 nights before. She put one hand on her stomach. "I'm going to figure this out," she said quietly. To herself or to the baby, she wasn't sure. Maybe both. She called her mom the next morning from her car, still parked in the firm's garage, 15 minutes before she was due upstairs. Her mother answered on the second ring, which she always did, as if she kept her phone nearby for exactly this kind of call. "Something happened," Mara said. Her mother didn't ask questions right away. She just said, "Tell me." So Mara told her. All of it, the test, the bench outside the flower shop, the amber light, Devon's hand on the woman's back. When she finished, there was a brief silence, and then her mother said, in the measured voice she used when she was keeping herself from saying something much louder, "You need to talk to him, face to face, before you decide anything." "I know," and Mara. A pause. "The baby changes nothing about what he did. Don't let him use it to change the conversation." Mara gripped the steering wheel. "I know, Mom. I love you. I know that too." She went upstairs and drew elevations for 6 hours and didn't think about any of it once. She confronted him on Thursday evening. She'd chosen the time deliberately, after dinner, when the apartment was quiet and there was nowhere to be and no excuse to leave. She'd rehearsed an opening sentence for 2 days and then, when the moment came, abandoned it entirely. "I saw you Wednesday night," she said, "outside Mateo's. With her." Devon went still. It was a particular kind of stillness, not surprise, she noticed, more like a man watching a door he'd locked beginning to open. "Mara, how long?" He looked at the table. 8 months. 8 months. She did the math without meaning to. "Is the baby yours?" A longer pause. "Yes." Something moved through her, not quite pain, something more like the sensation of a building settling, walls adjusting to a shift in foundation. She'd half expected him to lie. Part of her had hoped he would, because a lie would have been easier in a specific way. It would have made her certain. "Were you going to tell me?" I was trying to figure out. He stopped. Started again. "I didn't know how." "That's not an answer." "No," he said, "it's not." She stood up and walked to the window. The city was lit and indifferent below, all those windows, all those separate lives. And she thought, how many of them are in this same room right now, having this same conversation, looking at this same view? Somehow that made it more bearable, not better, but more comprehensible. Less like a singular catastrophe, and more like a thing that happened to people. "I'm pregnant," she said. She heard him exhale behind her, a long, unsteady breath. "Mara, I'm not telling you because I want something from you. I'm telling you because you should know." She turned around. "I haven't decided anything yet about what that means. But I'm telling you." He looked, and this was the thing she hadn't expected. He looked devastated. Not trapped, devastated. Like a man staring at the specific thing he'd destroyed, understanding for the first time what it was worth. She didn't let it move her. Not then. "I need you to leave tonight," she said. "I need the apartment to myself." He didn't argue. He packed a bag in silence and left, and the door clicked shut behind him, and Mara stood in the middle of the living room for a long time before she finally, at last, sat down on the couch and let herself cry. She did not go back to him. She thought she might, in those first 2 weeks, thought that love was its own kind of gravity and she'd feel herself pulled back toward it despite everything. But the pull didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and more unexpected. Clarity. As if grief, when it finally arrived, had cleaned the lens of something she'd been looking through for 4 years. She could see it now. The relationship had been shaped entirely around Devon's comfort. His schedule, his preferences, his version of the future, and she had arranged herself around those things so gradually, so naturally, that she hadn't noticed how much arranging she'd done. She moved out of the apartment they'd shared. She found a place 2 neighborhoods over, a 3rd-floor unit with big south-facing windows, and a kitchen that smelled like someone had once grown herbs in it. Her mother helped her carry boxes. Her dad, who said little but did everything, assembled her bed frame and then stood in her new bedroom doorway and said, "This is a good space, Mara," and she knew he meant more than the room. The pregnancy continued. She told the firm at 14 weeks, once the review was done and the promotion was confirmed. She wasn't going to give anyone a reason to look at her differently during the evaluation. Her manager, a sharp woman in her 50s named Carol who had 3 grown children and no patience for anything unnecessary, looked at her across the desk and said, "Congratulations on both." And that was the end of it. She thought about Devon less than she expected. The woman he'd been seeing, her name was Prentice, Mara had eventually learned, a name she filed away and never spoke aloud, had delivered a boy in November. Devon sent her a message that month, 2 lines, careful and formal, asking if she needed anything. She replied, "I'm okay, thank you," and meant it. She met Gideon in February at a building materials expo she attended for work. She wasn't looking for anyone. She was 7 months pregnant, and she was there to evaluate a new line of sustainable cladding, and she had her work bag over one shoulder and a cup of coffee going cold in her hand, and no interest whatsoever in being charming. She was standing in front of a wall panel display, reading the spec sheet, when someone said from her left, "The thermal performance is actually overstated. I ran the numbers last quarter and it doesn't hold up in climate zones above 5. She looked up. The man was maybe 35, dark coat, the kind of face that looked like it spent time outdoors. He was looking at the panel, not at her. "You're in architecture?" she asked. "Structural engineering." He glanced at her. "You? Architecture?" She looked back at the spec sheet. "What does it test at in Zone 6? They talked for 45 minutes. She missed the panel discussion she'd registered for. At the end of it, he handed her his card, just the card. No performance, no awkward pivot, and said, "If you want me to send the data I pulled, I'm happy to share it." "Yes," she said. "Do that." She emailed him the following Tuesday. He replied within an hour, and the email was 3 paragraphs longer than strictly necessary, and she found herself reading it twice. They didn't date. Not while she was pregnant. That wasn't something either of them said explicitly, but it was understood. Gideon appeared in her life the way useful, decent things sometimes do. Slowly, and without drama. He sent the data, she replied. He mentioned a project he was working on that had an interesting structural problem. She had thoughts about it. They met for coffee twice before March, and both times it was comfortable in the specific way of conversations with someone who isn't trying to be anything other than what they are. He knew about the baby. She'd told him plainly, the second coffee. No setup. "I'm not with her father. I have good support around me. I'm doing fine." He'd nodded and said, "Okay," and then asked her a question about her current project because he understood. She would understand this later. Thinking back, that she wasn't sharing it as a burden to be managed. She was sharing it as information about who she was. Her daughter was born in April on a Sunday morning, in the middle of a rainstorm that hit the city sideways and made the hospital windows sound like they were under siege. Mara's mom held her hand through most of it. Her dad sat in the hallway and drank 3 cups of coffee and pretended he wasn't anxious. She named the baby Ren. When they put Ren on her chest, red and furious and smelling of something ancient and clean, Mara felt the last of the grief she'd been carrying since October finally leave her. Not gone, not erased, but released. Like setting down something heavy you'd stopped noticing you were holding. "Hi," she said to her daughter. "I've been waiting for you." Gideon sent flowers to the hospital. Just a small arrangement, nothing elaborate, with a card that said, "Congratulations. Get some sleep if you can." She laughed alone in her room while Ren slept in the bassinet beside her. She called him a month after Ren was born. Just to talk. They talked for an hour and a half. What followed wasn't fast or dramatic. It was the thing after the story you expect. Not a plot but a life. Sunday mornings and slow conversations. Gideon, who had a dog and a small house in a neighborhood with good trees and no patience for pretense. Who picked Ren up like he'd been practicing, steady-handed, matter-of-fact, and who talked to her in a low voice while she frowned at him with the concentrated seriousness of a 3-month-old evaluating a new variable. "She's deciding about me," he said. "She decides about everything," Mara said. She decided the mobile was unacceptable on day 2. He smiled and kept looking at Ren. Mara had spent a long time after October, wondering if she'd trusted the wrong instincts, if some part of her had known, with Devon, and chosen not to look, and maybe that was true. Maybe she'd been so focused on the shape of the future she thought she wanted, that she hadn't looked clearly at the person standing in it with her. But she was looking clearly now. That's what she'd carried out of it. The willingness to look clearly, even when it was inconvenient, even when what she saw was complicated. She looked at Gideon. She looked at Ren in his arms, frowning and considering. She looked at the afternoon light coming through her south-facing windows, the ones that had sold her on this apartment the day she'd signed the lease, standing in an empty room with her whole life about to become something new. She thought, this is it. This is exactly what I couldn't have planned. They got married the following spring, on a Saturday in May when the city was finally warm again, in a ceremony in the courtyard of an old building she'd helped restore exposed brick, planters full of something fragrant she couldn't name, light that fell clean and unhurried through the space. Her father walked her in and cried, which she'd known he would, and pretended he wasn't crying, which she'd known he would do too. Ren, 14 months old, sat in her grandmother's lap and observed the proceedings with the same evaluative gravity she brought to everything. Partway through the vows, she pointed at Gideon and said something that wasn't quite a word but was clearly an opinion. Everyone laughed. Gideon looked over at Ren with that steady, unhurried attention he brought to all things, and he smiled, and then he looked back at Mara, and in that look was something she hadn't known she was looking for until she found it. A man who was not performing love but practicing it, quietly, in all the small and unremarkable ways that turned out to be the only ways that mattered. She took his hand. Outside the courtyard, the city did what it always did, moved and hummed and carried its million separate lives in all directions, and inside, Mara stood in the light and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because everything had worked out, but because she had walked through the thing that broke her, and she had not broken. She held Gideon's hand and she thought of the bench outside the flower shop, the amber light, the cold tile floor at 3 in the morning, and she let all of it be what it was. Not erased, not wasted, just the path that led here. That was enough. That was more than enough.